So a rather interesting FAQ has been issued for Games Workshop's flagship tournament, and by their own words it looks like they're letting the cat out of the bag of a whole bunch of balance updates early. There's a big nerf for Tempest's Aquilons, small changes for a bunch of other factions, and a couple of clarifications to the core game. So let's talk about the document and what it means and doesn't. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, and it seems that it's time for another 40k rules update, this one coming courtesy of Games Workshop's World Champions of Warhammer event pack, which with usual circumstances I'd usually be taking with a pinch of salt, given that it's rules for one event and not core 40k as a whole, but the event pack on it literally says that these will be advanced notification of a bunch of changes in the upcoming next rules update, so it seems that we're getting a few teasers of the 40k balanced data slate early. The document's coming in regards to Games Workshop's World Champions of Warhammer event. That one's going to be happening in the not too distant future, in the weekend around the 22nd of November, I believe. And as Games Workshop tournaments go, it's one of the most important ones out there. It's their flagship high-level 40k tournament event, with their system of golden tickets where you win one if you win an event somewhere else in the world, and then everyone meets up for a few big games of 40k. And Games Workshop want it to be a showcase to be able to talk about the highest levels of play and have it basically under their wing as opposed to with independent organisations. Since they started doing this though, it often forces them to address a few key areas of contention and make some rulings, much in the same way that other independent tournament organisers would have to try and make sure that some grey areas in the rules were sorted out. And given that these come from Games Workshop themselves, it does mean that the rulings are really quite interesting. The way that these FAQs have come out is not posted publicly on their website to my knowledge, but links have been sent to really quite a lot of attendees, so it's been pretty widely circulated, and it was quite interesting to read over. Basically in the document though, in the foreword to the thing, they give us another hint as to when the next balance update would happen. They said the next updates to 40k will be in November and December, so really quite close to the event. So as a result, the design studios got in touch with the Warhammer events team and have decided to allow the events to use a bunch of things that are coming in the data slate, several bits of it minor FAQs about how things should work, but also a few genuinely quite big changes. Basically, it means that the document has got a lot more legitimacy and interest than normal, and while they're still not official 40k changes yet, it certainly sounds like they're shortly going to be. I'd expect the vast majority of these to turn up in the balanced data slate and FAQ documents when December rolls around. Even if they weren't though, I'd still be taking them seriously. They are rulings for Games Workshop's biggest, most official and formal event. And given that it's not really that far away, and it seems like the writing's on the wall that they will happen, I'd certainly be very happy to use these in the interim. As a quick aside before we start, I'll just give a quick shout out to the channel giveaway that's going to be happening for December. 4 channel viewers are each going to win a custom 40k army, £300 or $500 worth, and for this one I'm keeping it super freeform with people being able to select whatever they want. There's both a Patreon and a free way to enter, so check back at the end of the video if you want a little bit more details where I'll talk through it properly. In any case though, let's jump straight into it, and perhaps one of the biggest and most direct rules changes for the updates were that there's not one but 2 nerfs to the Tempest's Aquilons. This one maybe doesn't surprise me too much that they're getting reined in to some extent. They're widely considered one of the single strongest units in Warhammer 40k at the moment. I'm certain that even with these changes they'll still be getting a massive points increase at the next update, but this implies that there's rules changes on the way for them as well. The first one is a straight up errata to their precision drop ability, that's their 3-inch deep strike. They basically added the rules to say that it only happens in your movement phase, so basically if you want to rapid ingress them, then you won't be rapid ingressing at 3 inches, and this shuts down a couple of the seriously gamey things that you can do with them, such as say a big scary melee unit is just about to charge your tank, you spend 1 command point after they're moved to just put this squad in the way, then the enemy unit will have to charge these guys and not your big scary tank, and just kill a bunch of scions essentially, before likely just getting shot in the face by the tank that you just saved. It might also occasionally stop you dropping on primaries and things, but you'd still be able to use your servo sentry turret from rapid ingress, I guess. In general, I feel like that change is fair enough really. It did feel like a bit of a dumb movement shenanigan that you could do, and if you had a dedicated melee army, then it could just basically stop certain units from basically being able to function, and I don't think anyone would really have complained if this was the way that they'd written the rule in the first place. Even with this nerf, getting a 3-inch drop for 90 points is still kind of obscene, particularly with their damage and defense. That wasn't all for them though, as they also shot down an option for using both the servo sentry and the grenade in the same turn. I felt like maybe this one was a little bit unclear, as basically you can't use the grenade stratagem for a unit that's shot this turn already, but then the servo sentry shooting attack is kind of unusual. It feels more sort of a marker token making a shooting attack in the movement phase, as opposed to the unit actually having made an attack, but basically they say that if you use the servo sentry now, you're then forbidden from using the grenade stratagem, so you'd have to choose one or the other. I guess most of the time probably pass up on the grenade, given that those auto-hitting flamer shots are rather nice, unless you desperately want to put a hit on something that's really up-armoured with a 2+ save. This one might feel like a slightly small thing, and I still don't think it makes the unit bad at all, but the grenade stratagem was certainly something that was worth using on them before. Being able to 3-inch drop, and then they get a bunch of volume fire, and then also say enough damage to one-shot something like a Terminator or so, really meant that you could double down on guaranteeing the death of a unit using the grenade before they're shot in the shooting phase. So now to be a bit more of a choice, I feel like most of the time you're probably going to just pass up the grenade option to use the servo sentry attack, given that that's free even if it's not as strong. In any case, a couple of things that might curb the crimes of the Aquilons in the top-level competitive games, though I suspect that even with these two things, if they appear in the balanced data slate, are still going to mean that the unit goes up in points, as even with these two nerfs, just using them to 3-inch deep strike normally and throw their damage around is still a pretty crazy amount of value. Next up, it looks like the Black Templars have got a small buff to their stratagem Fervent Acclamation. This one you can use for one command point for a character-led unit, and it basically allows you to gain the benefits of a second Templar vow on top of the one that you already have access for your army. So say if you took the Feel No Pain one, you could gain the sustained hits or the lethal hits, for example. The thing is that the Templars have a bunch of enhancements and stratagems that get quite significantly better if one of the Templar vows is active for your army. So it kind of made sense that they should get the boosted version on the unit that's using this Fervent Acclamation rule, but because they'd written those buffs as needing to have the vow active for the entire army, not just the one unit, you wouldn't normally get the boosted versions of them, even if it made kind of intuitive sense that you might. In any case though, they do seem to have made an FAQ that looks a little bit against rules as written to me, basically saying you do get the boosted version if you're using an enhancement, so I guess like the 10 Houses Bones maybe. Though for some reason they only decided to address enhancements, not stratagems, which perhaps felt a bit weird given that they have both that have the same sort of issue. But in general I think that comboing Fervent Acclamation with one of those other boosts does make a lot of sense, and it's probably the way that it should have been to start with. Next up, it seems there's one to undo a little bit of damage they did in the last update, basically a slightly weird FAQ for Hellblasters, those basically trying to declare that they don't get their shoots on death if they're slain by things that aren't a normal enemy attack. So I guess perhaps things that make them die, like getting out of vehicles or perhaps unit coherency. But the way that they wrote it basically implies that hazardous checks wouldn't cause them to fire on death, despite there being a designer's commentary on the datasheet itself specifically saying otherwise. It meant that there were two rules going in two different ways, so it definitely needed an FAQ. And as expected, they basically just returned it to the way it was before, essentially saying that hazardous checks can still allow you to fire on death now, and adding that bit into the FAQ. Kind of makes sense, and certainly made sense to me, like that was the intention of the rule anyway. Due to the designer's commentary, that is how I would have played it still. Otherwise for the Marines there was just a small FAQ for Gladius, basically saying that you can use their adaptive strategy to flex into a different doctrine even if you don't have one active, as the wording was maybe just a tiny bit open to interpretation, though again that's exactly how I would have played it before myself. Next up, we've got one for the Spiky Knights with their Knights of Shade stratagem, a pretty important stratagem for the War Dogs in particular. That's the one that for one command point, two War Dogs can either move straight through walls and enemy units or charge through the same. The trigger point of this is a bit open to interpretation. It just says that you can use it in the movement phase or in the charge phase. You don't have to declare it when moving a unit or at the start of the phase or anything. And interestingly enough, it looks like someone's asked the question if you can roll the charge dice and then decide whether you're using it, and Games Workshop's answer is yes. I guess if you weren't playing it this way already, then it feels like it's a bit of a buff to the charge phase version of the stratagem, as it means that you can gain just a little bit of knowledge beforehand. Maybe if there was a path to get into combat that was a long charge, you could roll the dice and see whether or not you need to use Knights of Shades to get the other side of a pesky ruin, or whether you can just walk around, or otherwise you could just hold off on using the stratagem in the first place and check if the charge is actually going to succeed or not. I guess that would save you the feels bad use of the stratagem, where you pay the command points to be able to do it, and then you just roll Snake Eyes for your charge roll, and you might as well not have bothered making him able to walk through walls anyway. Overall, that definitely does feel kind of handy for the Chaos Knights, though I feel like it was maybe a bit more common to use that stratagem in the movement phase anyway. Use it to walk to the other side of walls and then get in position to make an easy charge, rather than do the walking through walls in the charge phase. Probably the single most interesting of the core changes of the update was this one. This one's something I've seen come up in games a fair few times, and it's basically the question as to when you're consolidating a unit, how much freedom do models have when they're consolidating and they're trying to get closer to an objective. Basically, the FAQ says that you can move in any direction provided you move each model slightly closer to that objective. They're still going to be able to consolidate on the objective if they're within range of it. The only thing that would stop them is if they're in base-to-base contact with it and then they couldn't get any closer. Occasionally that can be a kind of big deal for things that have ended close combat and then want to try and remain safe, particularly if you could have a model just hide behind ruins after fighting in close. It does depend on other things like not being able to do a normal consolidate into an enemy unit to use this in the first place. I feel like that one's at least a fairly handy one to have underlined though. I've definitely had people debate it with me a few times in the past, so nice to have something to point at when you're talking about how it works. Next up, there were a good bunch of questions for the Pariah Nexus mission cards, the first 3 of which didn't seem particularly exciting to me. Clarifying overwhelming force for attached units that might break into smaller units, attached units doing actions where if you break them apart they'll still be able to continue doing them, and a clarification for smoke and mirrors. It was the last 2 that I found a bit more interesting though. They stated that you are indeed allowed to overwatch while you're doing an action, and that would usually just apply to the actions that are going to finish at the end of the enemy turn. And it's interesting that the action rules basically say that your unit isn't eligible to shoot or declare a charge until the end of the turn, but for some reason don't say until the end of when the action's completed. So it does mean that they're free to do a bit of damage in the enemy turn via Overwatch if it was critical, and I guess in theory that could allow them to do heroic intervention as well perhaps, provided you don't wind up in a wrong place where you're not going to be able to do that action due to positioning. It does feel like a bit of a weird one, that one, and feels more like an oversight than anything else. I feel like the image is that the unit's supposed to be busy deploying its teleport homers or whatever else they're getting up to, rather than shooting the enemy. The other change here was a clarification to the Terraform mission. That's the one where you jump on a mid-board objective and try and do a defend action to basically plant your army's flag in it. And then if that's successful, it continues to generate you some more points each round until the end of the game. For the FAQ that they did here, they basically said that you can't start to perform a terraform action if an enemy unit is currently trying to terraform it, which actually seems like a fairly big change to me, given that if you have a situation where your opponent's trying to terraform the objective, then you can move up, take the objective, and have all your units in position to terraform it, and later in the turn one of your melee squads will be charging and killing that enemy unit easily. It just seems weird that despite massive control over an objective, you wouldn't even be able to start the terraform action, just literally because the opponent got there first. Seems a little bit of an odd choice to me there. Maybe it's just to stop people from being able to both terraform the same objective, which they said wasn't allowed in the last update, but it just feels like that might give even more advantage to the person who gets there first, which they already had really. Otherwise though, I feel like a few of the other changes were perhaps a little bit more on the minor side. There's a clarification for the Blood Angels Death Company Dreadnought that says that the surge move can allow it to go within engagement range of the enemy units. That is how most of them work, so no real surprise there. Either way, it's still fairly intimidating on mid-board objectives that it could just be stepping into melee with you. There were a couple of small ones for the Dark Angels that didn't seem to change too much. You now trigger Mortis on the Dark just after an Astartes model has taken a mortal wound. It seems a bit more freeform as to when that could be declared before, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily any worse. It seemed like there was a slightly confusingly meaningless one for Lionel Johnson, saying that his once per turn ability can be declared when you want to, and they've done the same for a Grey Knight one for some reason. For the Death Guard, they clarified their infected objective markers just a little bit more. This was something that they changed slightly in the last update, basically making them slightly more powerful and saying that they did indeed remain infected even if the opponent takes them off you, and then if they leave them behind then they become infected again. Some people were arguing that that meant that they came back under your control again, even though I couldn't really see the rules logic for that myself, whether or not it checked out rules as written previously. This one very much explicitly says that it doesn't come back under your control if the opponent basically had the objective and then loses it, but it does sprout up with Nurgle's Gift again as soon as they do lose control. For the Genestealer cults, there was a small one just to say that their slightly odd reserves by Cult Ambush will be denied by things like Omni Scramblers from Infiltrators. I'm not entirely sure about the technicalities of that one, but I guess it's just due to their slightly similar rules to Deep Strike, where they basically have the same rules, but it's not technically Deep Strike, I suppose. Again, the way that I would have played it before. And then that slightly odd Grey Knights one that says yes, you can declare Caldor Dragor's once per battle ability when you want to, though it really doesn't seem by the rule itself that there's anything to state that you do differently to that. Finally, there's the last few core rules things, all of which feel pretty niche. You can't make a reactive move to a unit getting out of a transport, which I don't think that you could do before anyway, as they technically haven't actually made a move, even if they count as having made a move for their own purposes. That one does maybe feel a bit counterintuitive to me, but I don't think it's changed. But on the flip side, if you get out of a transport that hasn't moved, you basically get to make your normal or advanced moves after that, and they underline that you still make one there. If you arrive at transport with rapid ingress, then the units inside can't disembark that phase. I don't think that's something that I've seen come up before. And then finally, you can't use reactive defensive stratagems like Armour of Contempt against things that are triggering a fights on death rule. I'm guessing something to do with the sequencing and the selecting a target step that the stratagem needs to activate. But I guess that could be kind of meaningful if you charge something that's going to hit you back really hard in return. Not being able to debuff the AP could actually matter for Space Marines or some of the other factions that have access to that. In any case, a fair mix of things there. Most of them feel kind of niche, though a few are really quite important to their factions. I'm sure this is just a taste of what's to come with the balanced data slate. I'd guess that these are the rules FAQs and polishing they're doing for the game, whereas the vast majority of the actual balance changes and the new rules that they're going to be doing for things like Cult Ambush, Miracle Dice and Deathwatch and things will be kept under lock and key until later. I say that the single most impactful thing is the nerf to the Tempestus Aquilons. Definitely relevant as one of the strongest units in the game at the moment. I quite like the buff for the Black Templars. The Hellblasters thing was an important thing to sort out, and I guess Chaos Knights, Knights of Shade certainly won't be unwelcome to them. I think the FAQ about consolidating around objectives is handy enough as well. Beyond that, most of the rest I don't think will impact people's games too much, but let me know your thoughts and everything down in the comments below. In any case, interesting enough and a bit unusual to get some of the balanced data slate and rules updates a little bit early. Finally though, I'll just cycle back to the big channel giveaway for December. I do giveaways on the channel every month, though I thought we'd round up the year with a bit of a big one. And as mentioned earlier, the December giveaway will be for 4 winners to get a custom 40k army of their designing, so hopefully it should be pretty guaranteed to be useful to as many people out there as possible. The rules for this one will be to select up to £300 or $500 worth of Warhammer kits at Games Workshop prices. So here's an example of what you could do with Tyranids, these starter sets, plus a Tyrannofex, Exocrine and Hive Tyrant for a bit of frontline muscle, and plus a Screamer Killer, Neurotyrant and Death Leaper. For this one, I'd guess you'd also have some Space Marines left over as well. Or here's one idea for Death Guard, going with the Combat Patrol to get some Plague Marines and a horde of Poxwalkers, a Plagueburst Crawler and Feasted Bloat Drone, 2 units of Scary Death Shroud with Scythes, and then a Rhino to cart those Plague Marines about. In any case, whatever people choose to go for, there'll be 2 equal ways to enter them, both links down in the video description, and both completely equal. Either you can support the channel on Patreon for any amount, that's the main thing that allows me to keep on making videos quite this regularly, and any support on there gets you automatic entry into each and every giveaway. I do regular ones of this sort of scale every month. Otherwise, you can enter completely for free by supporting via social media. To enter that way, you do 3 actions: subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the Facebook page to boost the algorithms, and then to actually enter the draw, a giveaway post appears on Facebook on the 1st of December from midnight UK time. I respond to that with a photo of any 40k mini or imagery, along with your name and the date handwritten within the same photo, just to deter bots and spammers. Then after all that's done, the draw is done with a random number generator and announced on the channel update video on YouTube around the 4th of December. At that point, I'll also reach out and contact the winners and ask them what army they'd like and get it all ordered in from Games Workshop. In any case, feel free to check out the Patreon page or the Facebook, both links down in the video description. I'll leave it there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep on top of Games Workshop's news and rules updates, and it'll be fun to review the balanced data slate when we do get that. And otherwise, feel free to check out the Patreon and all the other stuff down in the video description if you'd like to support, as well as giveaway entries. There's other things like names in the credits, seeing certain videos early, and a few other things for Patreon backers if you did want to check it out. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.